who is your biggest sleeper at the running back position?
Yeah, so I absolutely love Samaje Perine of the Denver Broncos, going as the current RB 35, 107th overall. And Dave, if I'm not wrong, you touched on him last week, and I want to directly quote you real quick. You called him a great safety valve who can catch the ball out of the backfield. I think that's a beautiful quote about Samaje Perine. I couldn't agree more. I do think he could alleviate some of this pressure off of Russell Wilson. Last season, he averaged 7.5 yards per reception. Last season and then the year before. So combined 7.5 yards per reception. And that's pretty respectable when you consider his ADOT was practically zero. So that's meaning he's catching the ball behind the line or maybe just right at the line. If you're thinking of like comps, like, okay, who did he look like last year as far as a pass catching running back? Think of like Josh Jacobs and Dalvin Cook. They were right in line with him. The past 2 seasons, he's had 7 games with at least 10 touches. And in those games, he's averaged 18.1 PPR fantasy points. And I think that's a really important stat because of Sean Payton coming in to coach the Denver Broncos. And I kind of want to look at the RB splits for Sean Payton in the last 6 seasons when he was the Saints head coach. So his RB1 averaged 273 total touches per season, with 66 of those being receptions. And the second running back in his offense, 173 total touches per season, with 36 of those being receptions. So the big question is like, okay, Javonte Williams, when he comes back, Samaje Perine's dead. And I don't exactly think so. And if Williams doesn't come back to start the season, Samaje Perine is a starting running back that you're getting 35th at the position. I love the value. And like I said, even if Javonte Williams comes back and is a star, Sean Payton's history, I do think that Samaje Perine will still get some work.
That's a great point, and he has always had that kind of dual threat coming out of the backfield. Samaje Perine does profile as the better pass catcher over Javonte Williams, but we did see a pretty big change in how Russell Wilson plays last year, and we, again, talked about this a little bit last week, but he's not scrambling for his life anymore, trying to pick up plays with his legs. He's okay taking that check down, which we didn't see earlier on in his career. I just looked it up. Javonte Williams had 21 targets in the first 3 weeks before tearing his ACL, so averaging 7 targets per game. I mean, even if Samaje Perine could just take a fraction of that, that's going to make him pretty valuable in PPR leagues. I think the one thing that a lot of people are going to be concerned about, though, is at this point in the offseason, we've already got some videos of Javonte Williams back in practice, cutting, running straight line a little bit, but we also saw the same thing around this time last year with J.K. Dobbins, who was never really up to 100% throughout the 2022 season. So, Jeff, do you have any concerns that maybe Javonte Williams just comes in here and renders Perine completely useless in Denver?
Completely useless, I can't get there. And I think that when you're looking at ADP, it's fair because if he does miss time, Perine steps in immediately as potentially that factor back out of that Denver offense. I do kind of wonder how much that passing usage, because they had Alvin Kamara in New Orleans and they had Reggie Bush before that in New Orleans. And a lot of the Saints offense was built around Darren Sproles was in New Orleans, and they had a first-round pick on Mark Ingram. And so they've had high investments on those running backs. And so that target share, I have a little bit of question about that, because what I expect Sean Payton to use the Denver offense, I think they're going to load max protect, bringing Adam Troutman in, using Greg Dulcich as kind of that joker piece that they move around. And we've got a lot of buzz here lately out of camp that he is emerging in that role. And I wrote a spotlight about Greg Dulcich kind of emerging in that role. And I think if you load max protect with Adam Troutman in there as being that inline tight end, you're working off the run game and you're using the run game off play action and you're allowing Russell Wilson to attack vertically. That doesn't leave a whole lot outside of maybe some screen usage. You're just not going to have a lot of those dump offs if you're using the running back in that play pass type role that he's usually hit, and he's usually picked up a blocker when you're keeping guys in like that and you're attacking vertically. And so that's my concern on the Denver offense. But I do think that Javonte Williams, it's encouraging to see him back in camp, and it does sound like there are encouraging signs around that. You point to J.K. Dobbins last year. Even in his absence, there wasn't really a back that stepped up in that Baltimore offense. And we know how run-heavy that Baltimore offense was. You didn't really get fantasy production out of anybody in that offense. And so I think sometimes the answer is nobody when we look for a potential answer. But if Sean Payton clicks, if Russell Wilson recovers, there's certainly going to be a ceiling in that Denver offense. Playing in the AFC West, they should be in a fair amount of shootouts. So the potential is there for Javonte Williams to pay off, especially if you're in a best ball format where you're not having to worry about getting him in that lineup. You get a touchdown, you catches 3 or 4 balls, and he gives you a good RB1 week.
Yeah, and I think another thing with Samaje Perine, we don't talk about this nearly enough in fantasy football analysis, but he is an amazing pass blocker, and you don't get any points for that, but you do get snaps for that. And then snaps turn into opportunities, opportunities turn into fantasy points. So that's why he was able to stay on the field so much, especially during the run in the playoffs. He's just a better pass blocker than Joe Mixon was. I don't know too much about Javonte Williams' abilities as a pass blocker, but I know that Perine, being that veteran presence who can do that, is going to earn a role just strictly there. And being on the field in passing downs does eventually turn into fantasy points. So it's hard to push back because where he's getting drafted right now, RB 35. I mean, at that point, we're looking at nothing but dart throws, and Samaje Perine does have an inarguably high ceiling. So Joey, I can't push back too hard on that one. I like the first pick there. If you're watching the show on YouTube right now, though, you can find a link in the description below to the podcast version. So what we do on YouTube is we just cut out some little parts from the podcast, put it up on YouTube so you can watch it. But if you want to check out the entire show where we get even a little bit deeper than what we're talking about on this YouTube channel, talking about sleepers, busts, little commentary, banter, introductions, jokes, all that sort of fun stuff, check out the link in the description below. You can find this podcast anywhere podcasts are found. Just search the Launchpad, Footballguys, Dave Kluge. You'll be able to find it no problem. Both of these gentlemen can be found over at Footballguys, where we are writing spotlight articles. We're actually going to be rolling out a new rankings platform in just about a week or so. Really exciting stuff. One of the most customizable ranking platforms I've ever seen in my life. I don't want to give away too much, but you can find that at footballguys.com if you have not already subscribed. Speaking of subscribing, if you haven't already subscribed at youtube.com/footballguys, be sure to do that so you can see all of the video content that we have coming out at Footballguys. That's youtube.com/footballguys. And finally, just doing all the housekeeping stuff here, go ahead and leave a review. If you're listening on a podcast, that's going to help me expand my reach more than anything else. So if you like the show and you got something to say, leave a 5-star review. And if you think that I'm terrible and you're still listening for whatever reason, let me know why I suck and leave a 1-star review. Any review will help. But let's go ahead and get into the rest of the show here. Jeff Bell, who is your biggest sleeper at the running back position?
My biggest sleeper is Trayveon Williams, Cincinnati running back, and he is you guys know me. I'm the dynasty captain over at Footballguys, so I've got that dynasty brain on a little bit. And Trayveon Williams, everybody, Chase Brown gets drafted, and everybody's so excited about that landing spot for Chase Brown because looking at the future of the Cincinnati backfield could be wide open. But the team has come out and really hinted, if not outright said, Trayveon Williams is going to have first crack at being that backup running back behind Joe Mixon. The team has also not exactly said glowing things about Mixon's future with the team, essentially saying he's here right now. And so Williams was a very, very productive college back. He had 1,760 yards at Texas A&M. That was the all-time single-season leader for Texas A&M rushing. He was third all-time in career rushing for Texas A&M. And Texas A&M, that's a big-time program. That's SEC football. That's big-time football. So when you've got a player that is that productive at that level, I think that is worth noting. A lot of what they've done traditionally with these backs is they've used them on special teams. Samaje Perine, Chris Evans, and Trayveon Williams were all core special teams members, and so Williams has that experience to be active game day. He's already said they have the first crack up, and so I vault him above Chase Brown, even though Brown is going 22 spots above him in ADP and underdog right now. And so you can get Williams. He's a RB 76 in ADP, and so it's really, really late dart throw, and really look at it. And if Joe Mixon were to miss time, you're stepping into a player that, one, you can start him, and I think that's important with running backs because if he has that number 2 role, Joe Mixon's out of the lineup, that he's auto-plugging him into the lineup, that high-value offense that he would potentially be stepping into. And when I'm thinking sleeper, I'm giving you a real sleeper, somebody that's off the radar and somebody that you can throw onto an end bench spot or grab him off of a deep dynasty waiver right now if your league mates are not paying attention on that, especially with the buzzy guy. And so often in dynasty, we want to go with those young guys because they're exciting, and the boring veteran that hasn't done anything yet surely must be terrible. But I mean, the guy has earned a roster spot through 3 seasons now, going into a 4th season.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to push back on that because, like you said, he's eventually free. It's not like you're paying up for a 3rd, 4th round pick on this guy or anything. You were going deep, deep, deep here with Trayveon Williams. But I guess my only pushback would be, you talked about the uncertainty with Joe Mixon's future, which has been discussed a lot with the Bengals and what they plan to do with Joe Mixon. I think they could save something like 12 million, I think it is, if they cut him this year. I mean, it seems like the logical thing to do, but at the same time, this is a team with Super Bowl aspirations, and Joe Mixon wears that C on his chest. He's been a pretty integral part of the team for a long time. So if they were to cut him, you don't think that they'd give the job to Trayveon Williams, right? Like they'd probably go bring in somebody like Ezekiel Elliott or Leonard Fournette. They'd probably try to address that position elsewhere. You don't think that there's any way that a team with Super Bowl aspirations is going to cut Joe Mixon and trot out Trayveon Williams as the week 1 running back, do you?
Well, I know that we are now past that magical date, June 1st, but there is such a thing as a post-June 1st designation. And so teams are just not going to cut talented players outside of like something extraordinary happening. I know that's a lot of talk with some of the running backs out there right now that guys are just going to get cut. There's no reason to. I mean, teams are underneath the salary cap at this point. They've already done their planning. We've seen some veteran trades out on teams that are kind of up against that border. And so I think looking long term, I would be surprised if he is the starting running back long term for the Bengals, because I think that if Joe Mixon moves on, I think that they would go out and invest a draft pick, and maybe even this year if Jahmyr Gibbs had been sitting there in the first round, maybe they had gone in that direction. But I think that I'm looking at just this year, we're talking about that, and a guy that can step into some spot starts when you're digging very deep into a high value opportunity. There's not a lot of players around that ADP that have that level of value potentially if it opens up for them.
And that's what I wanted to hint at. I just wanted to try to dig that out of you and get a deeper explanation on Trayveon Williams, because I don't think that you think that he's going to be the week 1 starter either.
No.
But like you said, Joe Mixon is probably still going to be on the team now that we're at this point in the offseason. He's probably going to be the week 1 starter, but he's missed 14 games in the last 3 years. So if you get that plug-and-play guy that you can get essentially for free, even if you're only getting 1, 2, maybe you get lucky and get 5 or 6, maybe you get really lucky and you get the second half of the season, you could get a guy that you can plug into your RB1 or RB2 spot at some point this season, and that's what you're looking for with sleepers, are these guys that can kind of pop up out of nowhere. Joey, do you have anything to add on this, talking about the Cincinnati Bengals backfield, kind of how you expect things might shake out a little bit?
Not really. I mean, I trust Jeff's opinion. It's so much, in fact, that I was in an underdog draft before this, and in the 18th round, Trayveon Williams was sitting there, and I took him. So if Jeff,
before
if
even
you're
hearing
wrong
his
on
explanation,
before hearing the explanation, I saw the notes, and I'm like, I'm going to take him. So Jeff, if you're wrong, I know sort of where you live. I'll just
we'll see each other again in the future. So
this is true.
Well, there you go. We've covered Trayveon Williams and Samaje Perine is 2 sleepers, and that leaves us with our final sleeper of the day. I'm going to talk a little bit about Damien Harris. And if you've been listening to the show for a few years now, or if you've been watching me on YouTube for a few years, you're probably sick of me touting Damien Harris. I was on him 2 years ago, and he had a breakout season, 15 touchdowns in New England. I was beating the drum for him again last year, and he got hurt week 1, and it was pretty much all downhill from there. But here I am again, looking at Damien Harris. Now in a new team, first time out of New England, and I think that he is just a perfect fit for this Bills offense. They tried forcing Devin Singletary into a role that he couldn't really play into. He was just too undersized to be that between the 20s bruiser and goal line back, and I know they called him motor, said that that's kind of the motor that powered the offense, but he wasn't built for that. He's 5'8", a hair over 200 pounds, and then in steps Damien Harris, 3 inches taller, 15 pounds heavier, more power, better long speed, high-end burst that Singletary doesn't have, and in back-to-back years, Devin Singletary in that role saw a minimum of 150 touches, and that's a mark that we have only seen Damien Harris hit once during his 4 years in New England. And I get it, a lot of that came down to injuries, but when healthy, it seemed like Damien Harris was the preferred back in New England. Now that when healthy caveat is pretty important, because Damien Harris is no stranger to injuries and he picks them up frequently, but if he's able to pick them up, he's going to be looking at an opportunity on an explosive offense that he has never seen before, and arguably see more touches than he ever saw during his stint in New England. Just 2 years ago, Damien Harris led the league in touchdowns and was graded as PFF's best running back that season, and now he gets to assume a similar role on a better offense. For me, the obvious downside here is the lack of high-value touches. I mean, and we had to deal with that same thing with Singletary, where Josh Allen was taking the goal line work. Just last year, James Cook was taking the passing down work, but that's baked into his ADP. Right now, you're getting him at RB 39 on underdog fantasy leagues. RB39 is crazy. Devin Singletary has been a top 24 running back or better in back-to-back seasons. If we assume that Damien Harris is going to take on that role, he's being drafted way below his floor right now. So I don't know if he's got this immense ceiling where he's going to run away with 300 touches in this offense. But if you're looking at a guy that should be the between the 20s bruiser and getting some goal line work on a high-powered offense, I think that he sees at least 150 touches and gives us a top 24 season with some potentially sneaky upside due to that possible goal line work. Joey, Jeff, I want to hear from both of you on this one, but Jeff, as the resident Bills fan here, talk to me first a little bit about Damien Harris. Obviously, it's a small contract. He has struggled to stay healthy. Do you think that he's just kind of there as a backup this season?
I think that I think that last year they wanted to use a 3-back rotation, and Zach Moss really struggled in that role, and they obviously moved on from him. And James Cook was a rookie in that role, and so I think that this year I think that they do want to use a 3-back rotation. I'm curious that the one that has me scratching my head that I think is falling way under the radar right now is Nyheim Hines, going out and bringing him in, and I know that he saw only special teams usage, but adding that piece as a pass catcher out of the running back, I think allows them to build the offense to feature pass catchers at the running back position. And that points me to James Cook being the primary option in that offense as a pass catcher out of the backfield, having a backup plan with Nyheim Hines, getting him a little bit of work. And then if that's the case, then you're really looking at very, very specific usage on Damien Harris, really as a hammer back, early down back, maybe goal line. And yeah, he might get to being a top 24 running back just from accumulating numbers, but how many weeks is he going to click off as a RB1 would be my question overall on that. And so that's my hesitation on even at a lower ADP is this going to be a player that you feel comfortable putting into your lineup, or is this going to be a guy that you draft and you say, okay, on a bye week or an injury, I guess I can go with Damien Harris, but I don't feel great on having Damien Harris, and I want that injury away guy or have slam dunks, and especially the way ADP is falling out right now because running backs are being pushed down the board and wide receivers are going so early, I think you can easily build a very, very strong team that locks in 2 strong starting running back positions. So it's one of those that, yes, he might get there. He might get there to be a low-end RB2, but how good are you going to feel about him putting him into a lineup? And if you're playing him in best ball, how often are you going to get a strong startable RB1 week?
Yeah, that's very fair, and I thought I talked about that a little bit. You know, he does lack the ceiling because he's not going to be getting those high-value touches, but if you can get a guy in the 10th, 11th, 12th round that I think you can kind of pencil in for like a minimum 800 yards rushing. And then on the high end range of outcomes, you can get 1,1300 yards rushing and a dozen or 15 touchdowns on top of that. Then all of a sudden you're looking at an RB1. So there is a pretty wide range of outcomes there if everything plays out perfectly. But I think that there's also a very safe floor. So like you said, you know, just getting through bye weeks and things like that. I think that there is a need for a guy like Damien Harris on a fantasy team. Joey, not the resident Bills fan here, so maybe you can look at this through a different lens. What do you kind of see? I mean, we haven't even mentioned Latavius Murray, who I don't know if he's going to be on the week 1 roster or not, but Latavius Murray is there right now in camp. Another name to watch. It seems like, you know, now that they've moved on from Devin Singletary, they just loaded up this running back room with as many people as possible. This summer might actually just be tryouts to see who actually makes the final roster.
Yeah, it's funny. Harris is tied into kind of who my bust is, but I don't want to get into that this moment. You know, you said if the perfect scenario happens for Harris, you know, he could be an RB1. We kind of saw the perfect scenario lay out last year with a high-powered offense. Nobody expected the Lions to have an high-powered offense, but Jamal Williams, you know, 19 touchdowns. You know, if Stephon Diggs falls down at the 5-yard line like Amon-Ra St. Brown did last year, you know, Damien Harris can just run those balls in, just like Jamal Williams did last season. So I think we've seen the perfect kind of scenario lay itself out. And in PPR, Jamal Williams, I think, finished as, what was it, the RB14? So he wasn't an RB1, but pretty close.
Yeah, and I think that's what you're hoping with Damien Harris is that he assumes the goal line work. And the nice thing is you'll know a few weeks into the season what his role looks like. So if it's week or 3 or 4, he's not getting goal line work and he's only getting carries in between the 20s, you cut him from your roster, you move on, and you go pick up Trayveon Williams or whoever else. Thank you so much for tuning in. On the right side of your screen, you're going to see some other videos that we have on the Football Guys YouTube, so you can check out some other shows that we have, like the Audible, the Pretend GM, the Football Guys College Football Show, and so much more. If you haven't already, subscribe at youtube.com/footballguys and give us a thumbs up on this video, because that is going to help some other people find it. Thank you so much for tuning in.